Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, helping homeowners trade out old windows for modern, energy-efficient windows with curb appeal. Estimates at callmosby.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Danny Wicentowski. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet is one of the oldest religious institutions in St. Louis. Its mother house is an imposing brick structure in South City, and it's where for more than a century nuns have lived, prayed, and worked to help the communities around them. Earlier this year, I was allowed to attend an unusual meeting at the Mother House. It meets every month, gathering a handful of Catholic parents with transgender children. I entered the Mother House through the dining room beneath the chapel, passing by a sign with a rainbow background and the words, "Save Trans Lives." It's not a statement you're likely to see so openly at Catholic churches. St. Louis is a deeply Catholic city with more than 100 parishes and numerous schools, and at the meeting I listened to parents talk about how they navigate the pressure on their families and their faith as they supported their trans kids. Some compared notes on how different Catholic high schools approach the use of pronouns. Other parents had adult children with careers and families of their own. They talked about sensitive personal issues, and I was allowed to attend on the condition that the parents' identities and their stories stay confidential. The organizer of these meetings is Sister Nancy Corcoran. Roughly every month for the last 2 years, she's hosted this dinner at the Mother House. And for these parents who join her, the meetings have become a space where supporting their trans kids and being Catholic isn't a contradiction. For Sister Nancy, these meetings are her ministry and part of her role with the Sisters of St. Joseph. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet are a religious congregation of pontifical right, and that means they are recognized by and accountable to the Vatican. The meetings Sister Nancy leads aren't a secret, and she told me that she keeps the Archbishop informed, but the meetings are not officially endorsed by the St. Louis Archdiocese. Officially, the St. Louis Archdiocese and the Missouri Catholic Conference take a much different position than Sister Nancy. Those institutions have thrown their support behind legislation and policies that would define sex as strictly male or female, ban forms of gender-affirming care, and restrict where trans people can use the bathroom. Later in the hour, we'll talk more about how trans people have come under pressure yet again in the recently concluded session of the Missouri legislature, and the role of faith in that debate. But away from that debate, Catholic parents in St. Louis are finding support from Sister Nancy Corcoran, and last month I had a chance to talk with her. We began by talking about her own moment of revelation roughly a decade ago when, as a college instructor, she first encountered a transgender student. The interaction inspired her to minister to transgender people and their families here in St. Louis. Here's Sister Nancy.
Gender, I had always kind of struggled with. I always believed kind of the men and women. And I thought, I need to do something here. I need to change that because I think it's a God thing. Gender is, you know who you are. And I thought, Nancy, you're blind and stupid in an area that is making a big difference to people's lives, and so you need to learn. So when I, probably maybe 2 years later, I was retiring. And I asked my sisters if I could take a sabbatical, which I had never had before. And I thought, they said, well, what do you want? Do you want a degree? And I said, no, I have one. And I'm retiring. I want to learn about transgender. So I had 2 years to go to every transgender conference in the country. And I had never seen them before. They were all over. Of course, the first one had started in Boston, and I didn't know about it.
Now, at some point, you come here to St. Louis. You had spent time here as an educator earlier in your career, but about a decade ago, you come here to St. Louis. You're based at the Mother House at the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, and you begin attending meetings of parents of trans kids. Meetings are called Transparent. They started here in St. Louis, I understand.
By a Catholic woman.
Tell me about these meetings, because I understand you listen for a great amount of time, but there is a moment where you have to reveal yourself in your own way as a member of the Catholic faith and someone who is part of the Catholic institution to some degree. What were these meetings like? How did you reach that moment of letting them know who you really are?
Well, it was hard to get into it. I had asked, I explained who I was, a Catholic nun, and was not a welcoming thought, because why would people want a nun to come in and listen to these sacred stories? And so I whittled my way in, you could say. And I had promised that I would say nothing. I would sit there, and so we would go. There were probably 25, 30 people in a circle. And I would say nothing. When it came to me, I'd just say pass. And I was told that they thought I was just an old grandmother who was trying to learn something about transgender. And I don't even remember the story that touched me so much. I remember exactly where I was sitting and what room I was in. And I just said, I just need to tell you all that I'm a Roman Catholic nun, and I have so learned from you all. I'd never learned about unconditional love in the convent. But going to the transparent meetings, I learned about unconditional love. And then after that, I just thanked them, and I said, I don't even know what to say. It was just a moment of grace for me.
That moment of grace, you kind of grasped it and did what you could to extend it in a different way. You began hosting meetings at the Mother House, at the Sisters of Carondelet. How did those meetings begin? Why did you want to create that space for Catholic parents?
Well, one of the parents, young woman, called up, and I didn't know who she was. I mean, we don't share last name. I'm the only one that tells them my name is Nancy Corcoran. Everyone just says their first name. And she called me or emailed me and said, I'd like to meet with you. And I met with her, and she talked about wanting to meet. She was deeply loved her church, and she wanted to meet other Catholic parents who affirmed their children. And she looked at me, and I'm thinking, I mean, really, what can I do? I mean, I don't have a story to share. And I said, well, I can feed you. And she said, okay. And so one day a month, a group of parents, and so far there's been like 24 they don't all come at the same time. They come at different times, and they share their stories, and they eat, and they talk story about being Catholic and being affirming parents, because they don't see when the Bible says, when in Genesis it says male and female, it doesn't say male or female. And the second story really says, Adam supposedly says, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And we all know that we've got elements of masculinity if we're feminine, we've got elements of femininity if we're male.
And I want to talk more about, I think, the faith aspects of this, because when I had a chance to attend this meeting, one of these meetings earlier this year, it really struck me that people were connecting their relationships with God, their connections to the Bible, and looking at what their own children were going through and finding commonality, but also finding tension sometimes and conflict that they were trying to work through. You talked about what these parents were sharing. You called them sacred stories just a little bit ago. Why sacred? Where do the stories meet that point for you where they touch something divine?
Well, first of all, there's only parents come. And one major area for parents is the parents must grieve their child. But as the child becomes who they are thrilled. They're happy. They don't cut anymore. They start studying. They do better in school. They open the door to their bedroom. They change physically. They can see a change. At the exact same time, the parents are grieving the child. They're grieving the loss of the name they chose. They're grieving the fact that they have to do so much work to change their language, that they have to maybe talk to their child or acknowledge their child in the family home, but the child is not yet ready to be out. And so they play this kind of schizophrenic game of having to remember who they can say what to. And it's very, very difficult. And it's an area where churches could come in. Churches do a wonderful thing on grieving. We have rituals for it. It's
this brings to mind this discussion of grief as a kind of metaphor for what these parents are going through, and perhaps not a metaphor. You've mentioned to me before that trans people themselves, they don't need, I think these were your words, an old white nun.
Amen.
But the parents need them. And I think to some degree, when I've talked with trans people and trans youth, they do not experience this grief. They are happy to leave that version of them behind,
Yes.
and their parents' attempt to grasp and contain this can be very, very painful. And, some of the parents put this in their own words, and one of them, a mother, talked about why she appreciated the meetings you held, and it's because, her trans child is out to different people to different degrees. She can talk about it with some people, but not with others. And this mother said, that it feels like I'm living a double life.
Yes.
And coming to these meetings, she can share those both sides of those lives. It doesn't sound like these parents are prepared in some way to navigate living in these two spaces.
Not at all. And here's where churches could really help. It's real. It gets really heavy at times. When some parents come into meetings, either ours or the Transparent or PFLAG, they come as if they're so happy because they've been through 3 years or whatever, and they're very comfortable now with their child. And you've got a brand new parent has just walked in the door, in tears, sobbing, and they see this other person, and they think that they're being bad. They're not doing what should be done. And sometimes one of the parents will remind everyone, well, I understand what you're going through because I went through that too. It's a mutual counseling, because there's no therapist at our dinner. There's no therapist at a PFLAG meeting. There's no parents and friends of lesbian, gay, who overwhelmingly now work with parents of trans children or transparent.
One of the things that you mentioned during the meeting, I was there, and I think it's something you've mentioned before, is one of the lessons that you and other parents have had to learn is that it's not about you, or saying it's not about me, rather. And that, of course, makes a lot of sense. You don't possess these children or their identities or who they are. But on some other level, like, it's clearly about them because it's affecting them. They are in love with their family and committed to their children. And it sounds like, though, that they move through different stages. And there was a mother who did say, that she felt blessed to have a trans child, and that God trusted her with this mission and with this kind of love. When you're feeling these parents and their emotions, where does that line of it's not about you and you've got to be the one to step up? How do those things fit together? What do you see as those two pieces collide?
Parents who think about themselves and think about the shame, because a lot of times issues of lesbian and gay, people feel ashamed instead of just understanding it's just an aspect of humanity. It's being human. That's all it is. They have to step over the fact that they're going to be embarrassed. They're going to be the ones who need to take on the shame that that doesn't really exist, but that people project on them. And they have to realize it is not about them. It's about their child. Do they want their child to become the best person that they can be, whoever that is, whether it's male or female, or some is more difficulty, non-binary. One of the dads said, "Oh my God, I wish you'd just decide one way or the other. It's all right with me. This in between is hard." And being non-binary is difficult for many parents. The they word.
Absolutely. The language, just getting into those, that comfort level. One of the main topics from the meeting that I attended and that several parents discussed with personal experience was their kids going to Catholic schools in this region. And of all the different difficulties and challenges, having a trans child at a school that is ostensibly all boys or all girls and is has a Catholic faith or religious backing behind that structure. One of the parents said that this was one of the reasons why this meeting was so important, because Catholic life is parochial, and you need to have a chance to have parents say, this school was good, or this one isn't, or this church is good and this isn't. It sounds like you've created kind of a clearinghouse for that information. What is it like to hear that? And as someone who did work in schools with young people, what do you imagine this must be like for these young trans people and their parents to go through this in a Catholic school?
It's very difficult for the child. It's difficult for the parents. Here you have overwhelmingly Catholic teachers, Catholic administrators, who want to they want to be Catholic. They want to be a Catholic school. There is no real teaching, there are things that have come from Rome, but there's no dogma that says that trans is bad. It's just not there.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation with Catholic nun Nancy Corcoran, who is ministering and supporting transgender people in St. Louis. When we come back, we'll talk about the role the church takes in issues of gender and identity and why she believes and hopes that it can change. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Danny Wicentowski. Let's return to my conversation with Sister Nancy Corcoran. A nun with the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, Corcoran has spent the last 2 years holding meetings of support and affirmation for Catholic parents with transgender children. I interviewed Corcoran last month. All of the people at the meeting that I attended, they talked and connected their experience with their kids with their faith in different ways. And I think there is this issue I think that we have to discuss, which is that the Archdiocese of St. Louis, they have support groups for people who are queer or gender nonconforming or gay, but these are meetings that are specifically around either living with celibacy or for parents who are coming together, but they are not affirming what is happening to their kids. This was a topic that came up in this meeting. What does it mean that the Archdiocese of St. Louis has these meetings? Yours, though, they are grassroots. They are organized by yourself. They are not under the umbrella of official Archdiocese programs. What does this distinction mean? What does it mean for the parents to know that there are other meetings and other parents out there who are having a much, much different communal gathering over these very similar scenarios?
That's a good question. Well, let me explain something about the Catholic thought. There is a concept that is supported, I must say, by the Catholic Conference, that we all think in the same way. So Catholic means universal. We're a big church. There are Catholics who think every word that Pope Leo says is sinful, not following the tradition. And some people think that everything he says is God's word. And we're all Catholic. We're on a spectrum. And our Archbishop has to live with that. He came to close a lot of churches, and a lot of people very angry with him about that. So I have hopes that someday, along with courage and encourage,
those are the names of the Archdiocese existing groups,
that there'll be one called affirming parents. Because we need to break out of the myth that we all think alike. And we don't. And dissent is important, especially nuns. I think that's really our job. I feel totally supported by my sisters. We have an expression, with one of us is, we all are. So in reality, the way my community looks at it is they're all involved in transgender ministry. They're all involved in LGBT. They're all affirming of people in their lives. When I go into a group and I say I'm a Roman Catholic nun, I literally represent the Roman Catholic Church because nobody else is there. And it's one of the few times where women can represent the Roman Catholic Church. And I take full advantage of that. I love the church as much as the parents do. I'm older, so I probably even love it more. But I can critique it because I love it.
There was some news earlier this year where a Catholic priest named Father Mitch Doyen testified in Jefferson City, and he made this point where he was asked, I think, by a lawmaker, about, doesn't this conflict with Catholic dogma? And Mitch Doyen, Father Doyen, responded that he's not saying to change the church teaching. He said that the church teaches the value of the sacrament of marriage, the beauty of a love between a man and a woman that reveals God's love in the world. All of that is true. But why then, Father Doyen asked, because all of this is true, do we have to say that nothing else can be true?
Yes.
Now, Father Doyen did this statement attracted a statement from the Archdiocese saying he was speaking, only for himself. It reiterated that the Catholic Church consistently reaffirms the dignity of all men and women, including those who experience gender dysphoria. But it says that the pastoral care and support of individuals who identify as transgender does not mean that we condone. And then it's described basically gender-affirming surgeries, which has become a focus of the legislature. They don't condone the chemical treatment or surgical procedures designed to alter the appearance of one's gender. This is coming from the Archdiocese, and yet here you are still doing this work. How do these things coexist?
Well, several years ago, Vatican II told nuns that we are supposed to look back to our history, and we found out that we're supposed to wear the dress of the day.
What does that mean?
Well, you can wear anything you want, frankly.
Oh, the dress of the modern time. The current
modern time, because that's what they did. They wore the dress of a widow so you could go out in the street without a man. Somebody said to me, the Pope wants you to wear, because he had said something, a habit. And I said, he has every right in the world to say that. And as a Catholic, I have every right in the world to say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not about faith and morals. When the Catholic Church responds, they're responding to information. Science and the Catholic Church haven't always been friends. And I fear sometime that that's true now, and we have a history of making enormous errors. I think this is an error.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about is, I think, the presence of fear that the parents of these trans kids are experiencing. And I think when we've had our show cover these issues before. We've talked to trans people themselves. We've talked to trans children. And often we do hear the vast anxiety of trying to find your place in a world where the doors can be closed, the definitions can change, and sometimes states can pass laws that criminalize your basic bodily functions. I heard a lot of fear from the parents, but so much love and their feeling of inspiration at seeing how their children are living authentic lives. But I think it's worth looking at that fear because this is a moment where things are changing and things could get even more fearful for them. What does this look like to you, these parents wrestling with these questions, some of them even maybe considering leaving the state?
They're on their own, is what it looks like to me. I know 40 families who have already left the state. These are good, hardworking people, loving people. The fear, the greatest fear, well, every family of trans, as a trans child, knows how long it will take to get across the river into Illinois, how long it would take to get to Canada, and if they can afford it, they all have passports. That's the kind of terror that they live in. When you think that when a child goes to school, they have to worry about where they're going to go to the bathroom? Really? It's not about that. I know a whole lot of trans people. I know of 5 people who have had genital surgery. It's expensive. It hurts like hell. It's not. What is important is that you can manifest, so when I walk into a room, you can tell that I'm male or female. That's what's important. It's not genital surgery. And that does not happen to anyone who is not an adult. But the lies that we believe on certain radio stations and television stations, and we believe them and follow them. And some people think that's Catholic. It's not.
These meetings are still going on. They've now, I think, gone 2 years now. You've had your 80th birthday.
I've had my 81st birthday.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
And where do you see this work going for you? I think a lot of folks of your age might be looking to relax. Where does this energy come from, and where do you hope it takes you?
Well, at the age of 81, let me tell you, I say as a joke, but it's also true, I miss my energy more than I miss my friends who have died, and they are legion. I have hope. One thing, the Catholic Church is fabulous in so many ways, and one is the hope. It's the Jesus metaphor, that no matter how bad could it be? When the story of Jesus, we just had, the Passion. That's pretty bad. But out of that, out of death can come life. So, if I don't have hope, then I can't believe it will really change. And not do I think it's going to. The Catholic Church always comes around to what's good for humanity. It's just we are so slow. We are very slow. I have hope that the Catholic Church can change. I mean, as the Archbishop is, God bless him, he preaches his embarrassment about having had 3 of his predecessors own slaves. Our Archbishop has been fabulous, educating all of us, encouraging the archives in the Archdiocese to look and to see who we were and who we never want to be again. That's a hope that somebody must have had a long time ago. 3 archbishops. Somebody must have been hoping, So I hope, yes, of course, the church will change. It always gets better.
That was Sister Nancy Corcoran, a nun with the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. She spoke to me late last month about the meetings she's organized affirming and supporting Catholic parents with transgender children in the St. Louis region. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll meet Reverend Eli Anthony and talk about how, as a trans person and a pastor, he is navigating the political and religious tensions facing trans people in Missouri. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Danny Wicentowski. On today's show, we've been exploring the ways that faith communities in St. Louis are supporting transgender people and their families. These are difficult times for trans people. The federal government has rolled back years of progress and removed trans people from the military. This year, states like Kansas passed harsh new restrictions on bathroom access, and a similar measure in Missouri was proposed during the recently concluded legislative session. Earlier this year, Reverend Eli Anthony stood with 20 other faith leaders to oppose that legislation and other bills like it. He was there with Sister Nancy Corcoran, a Catholic nun who we met earlier in the show. I wanted to understand what this year has been like for these faith communities, so I reached out to the Metropolitan Community Church of Greater St. Louis. It's a progressive Christian community where Reverend Anthony serves as assistant pastor. I sat down with him last week to talk about his experience growing up Catholic, being trans, and keeping his faith, even when other religious leaders and politicians are moving in a different direction. I want to ask you about an event on April 21st that you attended along with Sister Nancy Corcoran and other faith leaders. You read from a statement that, among other things, affirmed your connection to the trans community and that they are welcome in the state. And it was particularly delivered as a kind of response to what you were hearing from lawmakers in Jefferson City. Tell me, what did it mean to appear there with Sister Nancy? What did that statement mean to you and being in that moment?
Yeah, I think to appear there with Sister Nancy and with so many other faith leaders here in Missouri, it really was trying to be a statement that we were coming together as a beloved community, that the voice of hate is not the loudest voice here in St. Louis. There was over 30 different congregations that gathered and signed the statement, and it meant so much to have Sister Nancy there as someone who is Catholic and who has been doing social justice work for a really long time, that she was willing to put herself out there too.
You know, Sister Nancy, she mentioned to me just how special Catholicism is in this region. I think she described St. Louis as the Rome of the Midwest in some ways. You yourself grew up Catholic, not in St. Louis, but what are you seeing from people in that faith community, from people like Sister Nancy, who are finding space for trans people, even in an institution that clearly has struggled to, exist in the modern world and to create those spaces for other people?
What I see is them doing what I believe the Catholic Church has always done, is to be rooted in social justice. I got confirmed, and this is a little different, but I was taught about social justice and going to the least of these and going to the margins growing up. So I see them being deeply rooted in their own Catholic faith when they are going to the margins, and trans people are definitely on the margins, and trying to fight for a greater world for all of us to belong and call every child a beloved creature of God. That is something that I held dear and near to the Catholic Church growing up. That's where I learned about social justice. That's where I learned about, Jesus going and sitting with the tax collectors and the people that were pushed out to society. That this is, I feel like, a faithful conversation to have.
There is kind of another sphere of where this conversation is happening between faith and the acceptance and role of trans people and queer people, and that's in Jefferson City, in our state's capital, where discussions over legislation affecting trans people, bathroom bills, sports, it often comes down to declarations of faith, declarations of how many genders the Bible says there are. Mm-hmm. You have been part of this kind of pilgrimage of queer and trans people who go down to the state capitol every year to respond and to give your own voices. I think this was the first time you've done this year?
Yes.
What was that experience like? What was it like to see that level of conversation and the way that it operates in the halls of power?
In many ways, it was deeply heartbreaking to be a part of, to witness, for however long people try to say trans people don't exist, or to just really talk so much about where someone's going to the bathroom. And it is also so empowering to see trans person after trans person just come and testify that I'm beloved and I am just a person trying to exist in this world and trying to show each other like our own humanity. So it's the both and of hearing so many people, try to kind of erase you from existence in St. Louis when they say you can't go to the bathroom. How can you exist in public life if you can't go to the bathroom? But then to hear from my own community that we're not going to silence ourselves and we're going to go to the state capitol and testify for, I think some of them are like 6 hours long of sitting there and waiting for your turn just to be heard. And for those people to remember that, all of us to remember that our voice deserves to be heard and we deserve to show up and belong and exist alongside all other people who are just trying to live happily in St. Louis.
I listened to some of the testimony on one of the bills that would have restricted access to bathrooms and created a law that specifically said, there's two sexes or two genders. That hearing was really distinctive. You had parents of trans people, multiple parents, testifying opposing the bill. There was a mother of a trans child who said, "I am tired of people using God to justify hate and discrimination." At that same hearing, though, you had representatives of the Missouri Catholic Conference who testified in support of this bill, saying that it's sensible, it protects women. What does that separation feel like? That this is all taking place of people who read the same book and feel a connection to these stories and real things that they feel in their life. What are the contours of that separation? Why are these two sides so far apart on something that you experience very directly?
Yeah. I think so much of it, I try to see that we are all trying to do the best for the people around us. But I think the side that is not affirming has so many rules and so many laws about how to be good and how to get into heaven. And I think it can be really confining. And I think the side that is trying to support trans kids and support queer kids, when you're faced with what you're faced with, you have to break free from some of the rules and teachings that you grew up with, because I didn't grow up in a very affirming household, and I really struggled my own self to, how do I navigate what I know I am versus what I'm told in the church? And just a verse I really love and admire and that really helped me was Matthew 7:16, and it's about Jesus talking about we can test the teachings of doctrine, whether they're true or false, and what fruit does the teachings bear. And what helped me and finally was knowing that theology that affirms queer children, that affirms trans children, only brings life in abundance. It only brings happiness. It only brings people back to the church. It brings communities together, and teachings that don't affirm queer children, that don't affirm trans children, cause separation. It causes heartbreak. It causes suicide. It causes people to flee Missouri. It causes people to, flee the church. And so I see so much love and abundance that comes from erring on the side of love and erring on the side of trusting people who know who they are. And if I could do anything, I'm always going to err on the side of love. And I think that when we don't put God in a box and we don't put God's imagination in a box, I think it allows more people to be able to come to the table instead of less. But I think on the side that doesn't affirm, I think there's a lot of fear and a lot of shame. And I have so much grace and love for those people who, don't maybe know a God that loves them. And I think that when you put boxes on other people, I worry, how many boxes are you putting on yourself?
We're listening to my recent conversation with Reverend Eli Anthony. I spoke with him last week about his experience as a pastor, being transgender, and joining other faith leaders defending queer people in Missouri. I also spoke with him about my experience attending a support group organized by a Catholic nun for the parents of transgender kids. Let's return to that conversation. You know, in my experience in talking with some of these parents at just one of these meetings, I heard so much, love for their children, fear about what might happen, and also, them coming to grips with the parts of the Bible that don't resonate, perhaps, with what's happening in their life. There was mention of folks who, were not at that meeting, but whose realization that their kids were gay or queer created a huge religious fear that their children weren't going to go to heaven with them. And it led to estrangement, and it led to a lot of really, sad separation of many years. When you hear parents or stories where it's actually parts of the Bible or parts of their faith that might be separating them or that they can't see their way around, what is that grace that you feel for them as, that tension is creating pain?
Yeah. In my own family life, there was a lot of years of separation because I come from a strict Catholic family background, and it's took 5 or so years, but my own family's now very accepting of me. They call me Eli, they use my pronouns, but I think I understand the pain and fear that parents have, that they want their kid to go to heaven, they want their kid to belong in this world, and especially I can't imagine hearing state legislation, seeing social media, that the fear that they want their kid to be able to thrive and belong in this world. And I know it's so hard for children to hear that. And I think that that is the work of parents to do by themselves in these support groups that happen, or with PFLAG, or with groups that like Sister Nancy goes to and helps facilitate. But again, I see what they're trying to do, but just the end result is not creating actual connection and love with their child. And I think that only causes me heartbreak that families are separated because of putting God in a box and, not believing that God's love is so much more abundant and abound than we can even begin to believe. And I think the work of faith leaders in the church is to help people lean into that trust and lean into that love and know that God is so wholly just and so wholly loving that, at the end, I can't imagine if you believe in heaven and that is what you believe at the end, that God wouldn't say to you, oh, you loved too much.
Today, as we're sitting here, it's the last day of the Missouri legislative session. It looks like, some of the more wide-ranging bills, the ones that would have potentially blocked a lot of people from using the bathrooms that they want to use, that could have created a lot of legal issues, it's not going to become a law. A lot of queer people have been in this place before. Kind of another Missouri legislative session ends, and a lot of these bills have not come to fruition. Some of them have, and next year will likely be very similar. What have you drawn from watching what has really become a yearly ritual for a lot of queer people in Missouri, going to Jeff City? What did you observe there, and what are you carrying with you as you might have to really prepare to do this again and again?
Yeah. In some ways, it's quite exhausting to, again and again, not feel like you're being heard, because the legislators say, we're hearing you, we're doing all the research and all of these things. And it's like, at some point, it's like, I don't know if I believe you. Like, do you hear that you're actually hurting Missourians that want to live here and want to thrive and that love St. Louis and love all different parts of Missouri? So I hear the exhaustion in the people who, for however many years have been showing up. And I also see a greater movement within the trans community of continuing to lean into joy with one another and continuing to love and affirm one another, that we're not going to let our own voices be silenced, and we're not going to stop showing up. And we're going to keep coming, for 6-hour sessions, 10-hour sessions. Like, it doesn't matter. And we're going to gather more and more allies along the way. And I love the work of Promo, who goes door to door and talks with real Missourians and asks, do you know a trans person? And helps create those meaningful connections, because most people don't know if they know a trans person. And actually they do. And when we get to know each other's personal stories, I think that's when real work and real action can change. So I believe in the good work that is being done here in St. Louis. And as we prepare for other legislative sessions, I see the greater community leaning into a joy and a love that can't be taken away.
I think meeting a trans person or a queer person who's gone through the coming out story, you can see how individual those decisions are and how difficult so many of those steps. And yet we're living at a time where I think our president, our state legislature are really presenting being trans, being queer as a kind of ideology, something that is influencing where children are going, that if it's shown to them as an option, if you are affirming to them, this is some way a manipulation. And this is, similar to what lawmakers say, why laws must be passed to stop discussing. Don't say gay, don't discuss these things in schools. Is there something that gives you hope, even in this moment of change, and as there is these larger attempts to change the way our society looks at these issues? What gives you that hope, that grace, that'll keep you doing this?
Yeah, what gives me hope is just knowing that trans people have always existed and will always continue to exist, no matter the laws that are made. I didn't know about trans people when I grew up, but then I did see other people who were trans. But I think what gives me joy is, hearing the delight in somebody when you call them by their name, or when you affirm their pronouns, or when you show them the clothes that they can actually wear. So I see so much hope in trans joy and what it means to be able to navigate a world in which you weren't given the exact blueprint and which feels good to you, but knowing that you get to co-create along the way, and you get to go towards your own belovedness, and you get to look in the mirror and smile because you look like you. And I think that love and that joy is what always keeps me going, because there are so many people out there who are continuing to find joy and new ways of being and becoming. And I think that is what we get to teach all of us, no matter if we're cis or trans, that together we get to create a more beautiful world out there. And that is what I hope to continue to go towards.
In people's individual journeys, I've talked with a number of trans people and queer people who had to leave their religious communities and faiths to find that joy and to be in a place where they could feel that and feel that community around them. Is there something, from your, congregation or from your religious life where you do see that unity of trans joy and, the profound connection that you have to your faith?
Yeah, there are so many people that have to leave, and I had to leave my own faith. I had to leave Catholicism in order to find a place that accepted me. And I knocked on a lot of different denominational doors, and I think ending up at the Metropolitan Community Church was a beautiful place to end up. It started a year before Stonewall and was founded in that queer and trans people are beloved parts of God's creation. And that was the centering story of Reverend Troy Perry, who was kicked out of his church and made his own church. And it started in his little pink apartment with 12 people. And I think for me and my denomination that there's so much queer joy, trans joy, and heartbreak at the same time. Our sanctuary is filled with tissues because people come in and cry when they come to our service for the first time, because they didn't know that they could belong in a faith space, and they didn't know that exactly who they were was able to show up, and you didn't need to change. And our tagline is "Come as you are, believing as you do." And I think that is the hope and joy that we want to continue to work towards. And if we get it wrong, we say, we got it wrong, let's continue to expand the table and listen from the people who actually come into our church. So that is what we hope, that people can be spiritual, be faithful, and be exactly who they are, and you don't need to decide either or.
That was Reverend Eli Anthony, Associate Pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church of Greater St. Louis.
This episode was produced by Danny Wicentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.